The old alien collapsed in the middle of the bustling marketplace, and no one moved to help. Layla Carter's instincts kicked in before she even had time to think. One moment, she was navigating the crowded commerce hub of orbital station Lasara 7, searching for a replacement medkit. The next, she was shoving past gawking onlookers, dropping to her knees beside an ancient Varic warrior convulsing on the floor. His massive frame twitched violently, thick veins pulsing under his mottled gray skin. His four-clawed hand clutched at his broad chest, each breath coming in ragged, choking gasps. Layla barely registered the shocked murmurs from the alien spectators. They watched her in horrified silence, eyes darting between her and the dying warrior. No one offered to help. Cowards. She ignored them and pressed two fingers to the warrior's thick neck. His pulse was erratic, his dual hearts misfiring dangerously. Some kind of cardiac event, possibly fibrillation, maybe a clot. Whatever it was, he had minutes at best. Move, she snapped at the gathering crowd. I need space. The surrounding aliens shifted uneasily, but no one actually stepped forward. Varic were a warrior species, and their culture was a complicated mess of honor, rank, and debts. If this male was of high status, any interference, especially from an outsider, could be seen as an insult. Screw their customs. Layla tore open her satchel, hands moving fast. She yanked out her emergency stim pack, flipped the dosage to a high metabolic threshold, and pressed the injector against the warrior's jugular. A sharp hiss. The fluid surged into his bloodstream. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. The warrior's body remained limp, his breathing shallow. His twin hearts skipped, then. A deep, guttural sound tore from his throat as his body jerked violently back to life. Layla reeled as a clawed hand shot out, wrapping around her forearm with bone-crushing strength. Her breath hitched. She met the warrior's gaze, glowing, golden eyes burned into hers, filled with something between shock and recognition. The grip tightened. Her bones strained. For a split second, she thought she'd made a horrible mistake. Then, his fingers loosened. His body sagged. A rough, rumbling voice, one aged by centuries, escaped his lips. Lifebinder. Layla's brow furrowed. What? Before she could respond, a squad of armored warriors stormed into the marketplace. The Varic Honor Guard. They moved in perfect synchronization, weapons raised. The marketplace fell silent as the towering warriors closed in, their dark, silver-trimmed armor gleaming under the station's artificial light. Layla barely had time to move before she was seized, two massive warriors gripping her arms. Hey! What the hell, she protested, struggling against their iron grips. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward. His eyes, cold and calculating, flicked between her and the recovering elder on the ground. Then, he gave a sharp tilt of his head, the universal sign of submission. Layla blinked. They're showing respect? To me? The leader finally spoke, his voice deep and controlled. The Grand Warlord lives because of you, human. He straightened, looking down at her. And now, you will come with us. Before she could protest, she was dragged away, past the stunned crowd, past the lingering whispers. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she realized, her life had just changed forever. Layla sat in absolute silence as the Varic warship tore through space, the cold metal restraints biting into her wrists. This wasn't a rescue mission. This was an abduction. She had no idea where they were taking her. No idea why they hadn't just let the old warlord die and be done with it. All she knew was that she'd saved a life, and now, her own was no longer hers to control. The honor guards flanked her in absolute silence, their massive, battle-scarred frames completely motionless. The Varic were known as one of the deadliest warrior races in the galaxy. Their presence alone was enough to terrify most sentients. But Layla wasn't afraid. She was pissed. This is kidnapping, she said, breaking the silence. I'm a registered medical technician under Lasara 7 station laws. You can't just... Silence. The lead guard's voice was cold, final. Layla exhaled sharply, grinding her teeth. Fine. They wanted silence? Then she'd wait for answers. Minutes stretched into an hour. The ship's engines hummed in the background as they traveled through faster-than-light space. The eerie glow of hyperspace flickered through the reinforced viewport. Then, with a sudden lurch, the warship exited FTL. Layla's breath caught. Outside the viewport loomed an imposing, dark metal fortress, hanging in the void like a silent predator. The Varric flagship. A warship so massive that Lasara 7 could have fit inside it 3 times over. The realization settled in her chest like a weight of lead. She wasn't going to some bureaucratic office for a polite debriefing. She was being brought before someone important. The restraints unlocked with a metallic hiss. The guards yanked her to her feet and marched her down the warship's corridors, each step echoing in the cavernous halls of cold steel and glowing alien inscriptions. Finally, the doors before her parted with a deep, mechanical groan. And there, seated upon a raised throne of blackened metal, was the ancient warlord she had saved. The room was enormous, filled with towering Varric warriors, all standing in a rigid, disciplined formation. It smelled of heated metal, incense, and something deeply foreign, a scent that sent an involuntary chill down her spine. The old Varric sat motionless, watching her. He looked stronger than before, his golden eyes burning with a newfound intensity. His four-clawed hands rested on the armrests of his throne, his presence exuding power, authority, and something far more dangerous. One of the guards nudged Layla forward. She squared her shoulders. Fine. If they wanted a conversation, she'd give them one. So, she said, her voice steady, is this where you thank me for saving your life? Because, honestly, I'd settle for a ride back to the station. A slow, rumbling chuckle filled the room. Not from the warriors. From him. The warlord shifted slightly, his golden eyes never leaving hers. You are bold, he said, his voice deep, ancient. Most would be on their knees, begging for their lives. Layla lifted a brow. Yeah? Well, most people don't have to force a cardiac stimulant into an ungrateful alien's neck. Silence. Then, another low chuckle. The warriors around the room exchanged brief glances. The warlord exhaled, something like amusement flickering across his battle-worn face. You do not understand what you have done, human, he said, his voice lower now, weightier. Layla folded her arms. Enlighten me. The warlord leaned forward. You saved me, he said simply. And in doing so, you have bound me to you. Her stomach tightened. What the hell does that mean? The warlord's expression hardened. In the ways of my people, life is not simply given. A warrior's death is his own. But when another intervenes, a debt is created. A bond. One that cannot be ignored. Layla's pulse quickened. You're saying, what? You owe me now? He nodded once. The life debt is sacred. His golden eyes burned into hers. Until it is repaid, I am bound to protect you. To serve you. To ensure that no harm comes to you, no matter the cost. The words hit like a punch. Layla wasn't stupid. A debt of protection from a Varric Grand Warlord? That was power. That was influence. That was an entire empire's weight shifting in her favor. Her mouth went dry. And if I refuse? The warlord's gaze darkened. There is no refusal, he said. The moment you touched my fate, it became entwined with yours. You will be protected, but you will also be watched. Layla swallowed hard. 2 hours ago, she had been a nobody, a human medic just trying to get through her shift. Now? She had just inherited the absolute, unwavering protection of a warlord feared across the galaxy. And something told her, this was only the beginning. Layla wasn't sure what she expected after being told she now held the life debt of an ancient warlord, but being paraded through a warship full of battle-hardened Varric warriors wasn't it? Everywhere she walked, glowing golden eyes followed her. Some with curiosity. Others with thinly veiled hostility. The Varric were a proud, isolationist species, renowned for their military discipline and unwavering belief in honor. Outsiders, especially humans, were nothing more than weaklings to them. And yet, here she was. A nobody medic from Earth, marching beside their grand warlord. Her very existence among them was a disruption. Good. She kept her posture tall as she followed Korvoth, because that's what the warlord's name was, through the massive corridors of the Varric flagship, his honor guards surrounding them like an armored phalanx. The silence between them was tense. So, Layla said, breaking it. Is this the part where you put a crown on my head? Because I'm not great with speeches, but I can wing it. Korvoth didn't slow his pace. You speak too much. Layla shrugged. It's a human thing. Get used to it. Another Varric, one walking slightly behind Korvoth, gave a low, guttural growl. His dark armor bore an insignia that looked far more ornate than the others. A noble, then. She should be thrown out the airlock, the noble spat in their alien tongue, assuming she wouldn't understand. It is an insult that she still breathes. Layla arched a brow. You know I can understand you, right? The warrior stiffened, glaring at her in surprise. Korvoth, however, seemed utterly unbothered. This is Commander Vectal, Korvoth said, still walking. He believes your existence here is a disgrace. Well, that makes two of us, Layla muttered. I was having a pretty normal day before you kidnapped me. Vectal hissed. You do not understand the gravity of what has happened, human. The Grand Warlord's life was his own to give. By interfering, you have disrupted the course of fate. His survival will change everything. Layla stopped walking. Okay, but am I supposed to apologize for saving his life? Because if so, I'd like to formally say, you're welcome. The moment the words left her lips, half the warriors in the hall went rigid. Some looked furious. Others, amused. Korvoth exhaled deeply, his golden eyes glinting with something unreadable. You are bold, he said at last. Layla crossed her arms. You keep saying that like it's a bad thing. Korvoth studied her for a long, tense moment, then finally gestured toward the enormous, reinforced doors at the end of the corridor. Come, he commanded. There is something you must see. The doors groaned open, revealing an enormous chamber lined with towering metal obelisks. Strange, golden glyphs pulsed across their dark surfaces, glowing softly in the dim lighting. And at the very center of the room, a massive ceremonial pit. It was filled with thousands of engraved Varric names. Layla instinctively knew what this was. A memorial. Korvoth walked to its edge and motioned for her to follow. She hesitated, but did. He gestured to the countless engraved names. These are the warriors who have fallen in battle, he said. Each of them died with honor. Their names are carved in steel, never forgotten. Layla swallowed, suddenly feeling far too small. She glanced at Korvoth. Why are you showing me this? The warlord turned to her, eyes sharp. Because your name will be among them one day. Her blood ran cold. Korvoth lifted his clawed hand. A nearby attendant immediately stepped forward, handing him a ceremonial dagger. Then, before she could react, he sliced across his own palm. Dark, viscous blood dripped onto the stone. The warriors around them pounded their chests in unison, uttering a low, resonant chant. Layla's stomach tightened. What the hell is happening? Korvoth finally spoke. You saved my life, he said, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. And so, I offer you this. The ceremonial dagger was placed in her hands. The rite of bonding, Korvoth said, watching her closely. If you accept it, you will be marked as Varric in the eyes of my people. You will be protected. Respected. And one day, your name will be carved into this chamber, alongside warriors of legend. The silence was deafening. Layla's heart pounded. This wasn't just a tradition. This was permanence. If she cut her own palm, if she accepted this oath, it would mean she was no longer just human. She would be one of them. The warriors watched her, waiting. Vectal's glare burned into her, his rage barely contained. And Korvoth? His golden eyes were steady, patient, waiting for her decision. Layla looked down at the blade in her hands. She could say no. She could walk away. But some part of her, some deep, reckless part of her soul, knew she wouldn't. She took a slow breath. Then, without another word, she pressed the blade against her palm and sliced. A single drop of blood fell to the stone. And in that moment, Layla Carter was no longer just human. She was Varick. This content may violate our usage policies. Did we get it wrong? Please tell us by giving this response a thumbs down. The moment Layla's blood hit the stone, the hall erupted into sound. Some of the warriors pounded their fists against their chests in approval. Others remained deathly silent, their golden eyes narrowed. And then there was Vectal. The Varg noble stepped forward, his clawed hands curling into fists. His fury was barely restrained. "This is a mockery," he spat, his voice a snarl of disgust. "She does not deserve the right of bonding. She is an outsider. A weakling." The warriors around them tensed. Layla exhaled slowly, rolling her shoulders. She was getting real tired of this guy. Korvoth didn't flinch. His golden gaze remained steady. "The blood has been spilled," he said. "The rite is complete. She is one of us now." Vectal's clawed hand shot to his blade. "Then let her prove it," he growled. "By combat." A ripple of energy passed through the gathered warriors. A formal challenge. Layla's stomach tightened. She had seen how strong these aliens were. She had no illusions. If she fought one of them head-on, she was dead. Korvoth's jaw tensed. "You question my judgment?" "I question her worth," Vectal hissed. His glare burned into Layla. "She bleeds, yes. But can she fight? Or will she die like a fragile human?" Layla met his gaze. Her pulse was hammering, but she refused to show fear. She could feel every warrior in the room watching her now. Vectal smirked. He thought she was scared. He thought she would back down. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't about winning. This was about respect. And if there was one thing she knew, it was that sometimes survival itself was the greatest victory. The arena was carved from obsidian stone, deep within the warship's core. A crowd had gathered, standing along the outer ring, their golden eyes glowing in the dim firelight. Layla stood at the center, gripping the ritual blade they had handed her. It was curved, wickedly sharp, and twice as heavy as any weapon she'd ever held. Vectal loomed across from her, his own blade gleaming in the light. He was a foot taller, broader, and built like a walking tank. Layla exhaled slowly. She wasn't going to win this by strength. Korvoth stood at the edge of the arena, his expression unreadable. "The rules are simple," he said. "You fight until one of you yields, or is unable to stand." Layla's grip tightened. "Yeah. Simple." A war horn sounded. Vectal moved first. Layla barely had time to react before he was on her, his blade slashing through the air like a blur. She dodged left, feeling the air whistle past her face. Too fast. Way too fast. Vectal struck again, this time lower. Layla twisted, narrowly avoiding the slice, but his other hand shot out, catching her in the ribs. Pain exploded through her side. She staggered, gasping, but forced herself to keep moving. The crowd murmured. Vectal sneered. "Is this all humanity has to offer?" Layla wiped blood from her lip. "Nah," she muttered. "I'm just warming up." She adjusted her grip. She had to outthink him. Strength wouldn't win this. Tactics would. She let him lunge again, this time aiming for her throat. She dropped at the last second, rolling under him. And as she came up behind him, she slammed the hilt of her blade against his knee. Vectal stumbled forward. The crowd gasped. Layla didn't hesitate. She moved fast, slashing downward, cutting just deep enough to graze his armor and draw blood. It wasn't much. But it was enough. The warriors stirred. Vectal turned, his gaze burning. For a moment, Layla thought he would rip her apart. Then, he smirked. "You fight dirty," he said. Layla rolled her shoulders. "You fight predictable." Silence. Then, laughter. The warriors pounded their fists against their chests, murmuring in their guttural language. Vectal tilted his head. Then, to Layla's utter shock, he knelt before her. The crowd roared. Korvoth stepped forward. "The challenge is complete," he said. "The outsider has proven her place." Layla's knees nearly buckled. She was exhausted, bleeding, and sore as hell. But she had won. And she had just earned something far more valuable than victory. She had earned their respect. Layla barely had time to breathe after the duel. Her ribs ached, her arms felt like lead, and every muscle in her body screamed in protest. Yet, despite the exhaustion, she walked off the arena floor with her head high. She had proven herself. But the real battle was just beginning. Korvotha's honor guard escorted her from the fighting pit through the towering halls of the Varik flagship. The scent of burning incense and sharpened metal filled the air, a strange mix of ritual and war. The warriors she passed gave her new looks now. Not disgust. Not hostility. Respect. Even Vectal, the noble who had wanted her dead, now walked a step behind her, silent and brooding. He had acknowledged her victory. And in Varik culture, that meant everything. But something was wrong. She felt it in the air, a weight, a shift in the way the warriors spoke in hushed, clipped tones. Korvoth must have sensed it too. His golden eyes flicked toward the passing warriors, his face unreadable. They weren't celebrating her victory. They were afraid. They reached a vast war chamber, a massive hall lined with towering holographic displays, each one showing shifting tactical readouts. Layla barely had time to take in the intricate battle maps before Korvoth turned to her. "You fought well," he said. She shrugged, still catching her breath. "I fight better when I'm not nearly getting my spine broken." He gave a low, rumbling chuckle, but it faded quickly. His gaze hardened. "We need to talk," he said. Layla frowned. "About what?" The warlord stepped forward. "The truth about why you were brought here." A chill ran down her spine. "I thought it was because I saved your life," she said carefully. "It is," Korvoth admitted. "But that act disrupted something far greater than you realize." He gestured to the holographic displays. They shifted, revealing a fleet of warships, marked in deep red. "They were waiting for my death," he said. Layla's pulse spiked. "Who?" "The ones who plotted against me," Korvoth said, his golden eyes narrowing. "A faction within the noble houses. They knew my passing would leave a power vacuum, one they could use to seize control of the empire." Layla's stomach dropped. She had saved him. And in doing so, she had stopped a coup. "They wanted me dead," Korvoth continued, his voice low. "Now, they will seek other ways to achieve their goal." Layla swallowed. "And I just became part of this mess." The warlord nodded. "You are more than part of it. You are now a target." The war chamber hissed open. A Varik warrior, one of Korvotha's own guards, rushed inside, his face twisted in urgency. "The security systems have been breached," he growled. Korvotha's posture shifted instantly. "How?" "An inside agent," the warrior said grimly. "They are here. Now." Before Layla could even react, the lights in the chamber flickered. Then, a detonation rocked the entire warship. Layla staggered, bracing herself against the console as alarms blared. Korvotha's warriors immediately armed themselves. The doors burst open, and in stormed a dozen assassins. They were Varik, but not loyalists. Their armor was dark, their insignia stripped. Rogue warriors. Their leader, a tall, lean warrior with cold, silver eyes, stared directly at Layla. "Take the human," he ordered. The room erupted into chaos. Korvoth moved like a storm. In an instant, his massive form tore through the first assassin, snapping his blade in two and driving him into the wall with bone-crushing force. Layla ducked as another rogue warrior lunged for her. Her training as a medic wasn't much for combat, but she had learned enough to stay alive. She grabbed a fallen blade from the floor and turned just in time to block an incoming strike. Metal clashed against metal. The impact rattled her arms, but she held firm. Then, Vectal was there. The noble warrior who had once wanted her gone now fought beside her, his blade moving in lethal arcs. The assassins realized too late they were outmatched. One by one, they fell. And then, the last one turned and fled. Korvoth snarled. After him. Vectal and the guards pursued the survivor, vanishing into the corridors. Layla exhaled sharply, pressing a hand against her ribs. She was shaking. Then, Korvoth's golden eyes met hers. "This was no ordinary assassination attempt," he said. Layla nodded, still catching her breath. "They wanted to take me alive." Korvoth's expression darkened. "Which means someone has plans for you." A cold chill ran through her veins. She had thought she was just a bystander in a larger war. But now she was at the center of it. The warship was in lockdown. Layla could hear the distant thud of boots against metal, the wail of alarms reverberating through the massive halls. The failed assassination had changed everything. The coup was no longer a whisper in the dark, it was happening now. She stood beside Korvoth in the war chamber, her breath still ragged from the fight. Across the room, Vectal returned, his armor smeared with fresh battle scars. "The assassin is dead," Vectal announced. But not before revealing something troubling. Korvoth's golden eyes narrowed. "Speak." Vectal took a slow breath, his expression grim. "This is bigger than a power grab." He turned to Layla. "They weren't just trying to kill the Grand Warlord. They wanted to capture you." Layla stiffened. "Why?" she asked, her throat dry. Vectal hesitated, then glanced at Korvoth. "Because of what you represent." Korvoth exhaled, the sound heavy with meaning. "In our history," he said, "there has never been an outsider who has been bound by the right of blood. Never a non-Varic who stood beside a Grand Warlord." His gaze sharpened. "You are a symbol now, Layla. And symbols have power. Power that threatens those who seek to rule." Layla felt her stomach tighten. She had thought the duel, the assassins, the coup, it had all been about Korvoth. But no. She was the catalyst. She had changed the future of an empire without even realizing it. Korvoth turned to the war table, activating a holographic display of the Varic fleet. The image flickered, revealing something far worse than she expected. A second fleet. One marked in red. Layla's blood ran cold. "What is that?" Korvoth's expression hardened. "The fleet of the High Warlords." Vectal's jaw tightened. "They are already en route to the capital. If they seize control, the Empire will fall into civil war." Layla felt her pulse hammer. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. This was the beginning of an all-out war. "We need to stop them," Layla said, forcing steel into her voice. Vectal scoffed. "And how do you propose we do that, human? Our forces are outnumbered 3-1. Layla stared at the hologram, her mind racing. Outnumbered? Sure. But outmaneuvered? Not if she had anything to say about it. She turned to Korvoth. "How many ships do we still control?" "Less than a third of the fleet," he admitted. "Then we need to make that third count." She stepped forward, analyzing the holographic display. "They expect you to fight them in open battle. That's what they're preparing for. But what if we don't?" Vectal frowned. "What are you suggesting?" Layla inhaled sharply. "We lure them into a trap." The enemy fleet arrived hours later, expecting an easy victory. Instead, they walked into a perfectly coordinated ambush. Korvoth's forces, guided by Layla's strategic misdirection, drew them into a false advance, luring the High Warlords into the heart of the battlefield. Then, the real trap was sprung. Hidden within the debris field of a shattered moon, a hidden fleet of Varric loyalists emerged, cutting off their escape. The battle was fierce, brutal, and decisive. Layla stood in the command center, watching as Korvoth led the charge. He was a force of nature, his warship tearing through the enemy lines with calculated, terrifying precision. Vectel, despite his earlier doubts, fought by their side. And Layla? She had given them the plan. The strategy. The chance to win. Hours later, the battle was over. The High Warlords had been captured or killed. And the Empire had been saved. Layla stood beside Korvoth on the bridge, the stars stretching endlessly before them. "You changed everything today," Korvoth said, his voice quiet. She exhaled. "Yeah, well, I tend to do that." He turned to her, his golden eyes unwavering. "You have a choice now, Layla Carter." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "The Empire knows your name. You are no longer just an outsider." He hesitated. "You could return to Earth. Or you could stay. Become part of something greater." Layla looked out at the endless void beyond the viewport. Earth felt so far away now. She had come from nothing. Just a human medic on a space station. And now? Now she had saved an empire. She turned back to Korvoth and smiled. "I think I already made my choice."